Good evening, everyone. I am Jim Robinson. I am the Dean of the University of Chicago Divinity School, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Nathaniel Colver Lecture hosted by the Divinity School, the Baptist Theological Union, and the Martin Marty Center for the Public Understanding of Religion. The Divinity School is the nation's leading institution for the study of religion and the training of religious leaderships. Our faculty and our students approach religious studies and religious leadership with inquiry, innovation, and awareness of how their scholarship impacts questions of public and contemporary concern. First chartered in 1865 when Reverend Nathaniel Colver himself, for whom this lecture is named, began teaching Baptist students in his study, the then named Baptist Theological Seminary at Morgan Park was incorporated into the University of Chicago in 1890. The university's founders, J.D. Rockefeller and William Rainey Harper, believed a great American research university needed to include a divinity school for the scholarly study of religion. Thus, our school has served for more than a century as the largest educator of faculty members for theological seminaries, theological departments, and religious studies programs across the spectrum of institutions that comprise American higher education. Since its origin, the work of the Divinity School has been supported by the Baptist Theological Union, the co-host of tonight's event, together with the Martin Marty Center. I would like to invite a trustee of the BTU, the Baptist Theological Union, Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch Sr., to say a few words about the Colver Lecture and welcome tonight's guest. Before that, let me offer an introduction to Reverend Hatch. Reverend Dr. Marshall Elijah Hatch Sr. is the pastor of the New Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church located in the heart of Chicago's West Garfield community, where he has served since 1993. Reverend Hatch is a native of Chicago's West Side. Yeah. In fact, the apartment where he lived as a child and grew up has been recreated as part of the permanent exhibit of the National Public Housing Museum here in Chicago, literally part of the city. Reverend Hatch earned both a master's and a doctorate degree from McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. He also holds a master's degree in government from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree in political science from Western Illinois. Reverend Hatch is widely celebrated for his many decades of religious and civic involvement in the city of Chicago and is the winner of numerous awards and fellowships. He is the founder of the innovative Sankofa Wellness Village, which supports the growth and well-being of the residents of West Garfield Park. Reverend Hatch was also a 2024 Colver Lecturer. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch Sr.
Thank you, Dean Robinson, and good evening, everyone. You know, from the Black church, we expect a little more. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. As a trustee of the Baptist Theological Union and on behalf of the Divinity School and the Marty Martin Center, I welcome you to the 2025 Nathaniel Colver Lecture. This event is made possible with the support of the Baptist Theological Union's Nathaniel Colver Lectureship and Publication Fund, named for Nathaniel Colver, a 19th century Northern Baptist pastor, reformer, educator, and avowed abolitionist. This fund was established by his descendants to enable the Divinity School to bring, quote, persons of eminent scholarship or other special qualification to speak on religious, biblical, or moral, sociological, and other vital subjects. Previous Colver lectures have included Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Jr., the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who is here with us tonight, Marshall Hatch Jr., who's supposed to be here Where at? Stanton Marshall Hatch Jr. And as Dean Robinson mentioned, myself. We're blessed to have with us this evening someone who is the precise example of the type of thinker and moral leader that the Colver Lectureship was created to highlight. Cole Arthur Riley is a writer, poet, culture critic of wide renown, born and for the most part raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Cole studied writing at the University of Pittsburgh. She traces her love of words back to her father, who would bribe her and her siblings to write poems and stories, and her grandma, who was part writer and part sage. She has also been inspired by figures as diverse as Audre Lorde, Octavia Butler, James Baldwin, Thomas Merton, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Julian of Norwich. These sources of inspiration have led Cole Arthur Riley to a remarkable career as a thinker and writer. She is the author of New York Times bestseller, This Here Flesh, Spirituality, Liberation, and the Stories That Make Us and Black Liturgies. Prayers, poems, and meditations of staying human. Her writing has been featured in The Atlantic, The Washington Post. She is the creator and writer of Black Liturgies, a project that integrates spiritual practice with Black emotion, Black literature, and Black body. The creator of the Center of Dignity and Contemplation, where she serves as curator. We are honored to welcome here in Chicago tonight, Cole Arthur Riley as our 2025 Colbert Lecturer. Join me in welcoming her to the stage. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me in this space and allowing me to participate in this kind of lineage of other speakers. And the welcome has already been very warm and beautiful. So I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes, which is a lot to ask of you. Then we're going to have some time for Q&A. And I want to talk about dignity tonight. Dignity in the interior, dignity in the body, and finally, kind of inherited dignity. What of our dignity is from those who've come before us. All through my journey is kind of a Black, mystic, contemplative. Can you all hear me okay? No. I will try to be less soft-spoken. Again, I'm Cole. I am a writer. I'm a poet on my best days. And I come from upstate New York. I come to you from upstate New York, but originally was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, raised by my father and my grandmother and aunts and uncles, raised alongside cousins and siblings, of which we really made no differentiation because we all lived together. And I come from a very excitable, very funny family of extroverts. They're really energetic, communicative, expressive. My grandma used to say, "We Arthurs are nothing if not sound." And she would say how if we were all in the same store, she could just pinpoint where each of us were, just because everyone is so loud and big and charming and good with people. And then I came along. So out comes this quiet soul of a child. When I was young, I wasn't very verbal. I actually had something called selective mutism, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a anxiety condition that's often found in children, but can persist into adulthood, where in certain settings, one will find themselves kind of unable to speak. So for me, this was around anyone that wasn't my immediate household. I would kind of carry around a notepad and pass notes to my dad or my sister if other people were around. And that was in great juxtaposition to my family, who were very, energetic, communicative. So it would not be strange to find a family kind of home video of, everyone laughing, dancing, playing in the kitchen, and the camera pans to like 6-year-old Cole just staring out of a window by herself wistfully. And so, a very quiet child. My family would say I was a sad child. I say I was in touch with my own emotional life. But like many shy, quiet children, I was very near to my own interior world. I think many kind of quiet children are. I knew who I was. I knew what I liked, tucked away in closets, reading Goosebumps books or whatever. I was familiar with the sound of my own voice. And still, that connection to my inner life, that connection to even my sadness, was one of the earliest forms of alienation that I experienced. And, when you're a child, the things that make you distinct are some of our first portals to alienation. And I experienced that as such. I've been trying along the way to recover more of kind of childhood Cole that I've since abandoned, more of her, what was happening in those moments of alienation, and recovering a lot of really beautiful, mystical, for my sister and I, we used to take expired condiments and mix potions in the basement or like in our slide out back. And, I had all these ceremonies and these rituals, and I'm recovering all these really queer and beautiful kind of fragments from my childhood life and trying to honor them, and still remembering all of the kind of shame and alienation that they brought. So fast forward to, teenage years, you eventually grow to resent the things that make you different. So I began to slowly kind of abandon these things, not just like my kind of quiet, contemplative heart, but I kind of emptied my world of all magic, the girl who made potions, and I kind of took to knowledge and books to kind of shield myself from the pain of alienation, like many of us do. So fast forward to college. This was the first time I found myself in consistently, predominantly white spaces, white intellectually dominated spaces specifically. And, you go to college and everyone says, this is the time, you choose who you want to be. You can be anything you want. It's this fresh start. So I did. I chose to practice shape-shifting. I chose to morph into a version of me that would be palatable to whiteness, a version of me that would be most palatable to white intellectualism. I chose to change the cadence of my voice. I began to speak faster. I tried to be witty. I changed the kind of music I listened to, the kinds of things I was reading. I pretended to care a great deal about the theologies of dead white men who actually hated me and my Blackness. But I did what I could to construct myself. And what I wish I knew then, but feel now with some degree of certainty, is that finding your true self, claiming one's true self, is not a project of construction. I think it's a matter of listening. There is a kind of famous commencement address that Howard Thurman gave, but kind of by virtue of who I know to be in the room. I suspect many of you have encountered it. It's gone on to be called The Sound of the Genuine. If you've heard it before, you can receive a little bit of it now again. Thurman said, there is something in every one of you that waits, listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And if you cannot hear it, you will never find whatever it is for which you are searching. And if you hear it and then do not follow it, it was better that you had never been born. He says, and if you cannot locate the sound of the genuine in you, you will all your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. He says, there is in you something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And sometimes there's so much traffic going on in your minds, so many different kinds of signals, so many vast impulses floating through your organism that go back thousands of generations, long before you were even a thought in the mind of creation. And he says, and you were buffeted by these. And in the midst of all this, you've got to find out what your name is. Who are you? How does the sound of the genuine come through to you? I think what Thurman is getting at here, and what others, before him and like him are getting, is that we have a spiritual and maybe even moral imperative to locate our true selves. It's an anti-delusion practice, and true self, false self. I don't want to oversimplify it. I think there's much to be said and a lot of complexity and nuance into how we construct our false selves and the ways that we kind of hide and benefit from them at times. Some of us desire belonging, some praise, some power, some victimhood, and through that maybe absolution is maybe the deeper thing there. And some of us even safety. There are all kinds of reasons and impulses that I'm not quick to demonize, but I think self-hatred can so easily become entangled in this. I think the false self survives by the bread of self-hatred. Now, once you start making your false self appear real, like I did, with these tangible things, the kind of music you listen to, the way you speak, it becomes very difficult to all of a sudden just rend real from unreal, to just call upon one's true self when you're ready, when you're prepared. It's a practice. And I think this is what Thurman knew so acutely, that we will not become real, that we will not locate our true selves apart from a deep and habitual listening, rewiring, for lack of a better word. We're not machines, but it takes work and it takes time. Now, if you listen closely to the passage from, Thurman's address, a lot of people, they call on me to talk about justice and liberation, and they want the fire, and I start with the interior, and people are like, what does this have, why are we going here? What does this have to, I'll tell you why, because if you listen closely to the passage from Thurman's address, you heard him say, the risk. If you do not locate the sound of the genuine in you, you will, all your days, spend your life on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. Now, who's pulling the strings? Those metaphorical strings have everything to do with the ways indignity and injustice are perpetuated in the world. When you are poorly attuned to yourself, when you're poorly attuned to the stories that have made you, the dreams, the emotions, the fears, how are you going to notice what compels you to vote for a particular candidate or demand particular policies, or confess or not confess? If I'm going to get free, I need you to get, I don't benefit from your false self, nor do you mine. And if I'm going to get free, I need you to get free. And those strings that Thurman's referencing, those strings are chains. Now, sometimes this journey to locate one's interior dignity, one's true self, is actually the journey away from spaces of false belonging. So it's not without loss. It wasn't without loss for me, because the closer you get to your true self, the more you will disturb the waters of someone else's mask. People don't tend to like this. People don't tend to like to be confronted with their false self in the presence of something real. They might not love to, see you decolonizing your interior landscape. They might not love to hear what you really think about trans lives, about heaven or hell, about your own face. And so I say this to say this journey is a confrontation. And many of us, the journey to naming our interior dignity is a journey that comes at great relational cost. So I always say when I'm giving this talk that, I talk a lot about dignity and liberation, but it takes time. And it takes time because there's real relationship at stake, real risk, and coming toward your truest self. And I think we can move with both urgency in protection of our true self and also compassion for all of the things that have made us terrified to approach it. But is interior dignity it? Okay, is that sufficient? I want to spend some time talking about dignity and the body. I wrote about this some in my first book, but I was 26 when I became sick. It started with something like the flu, and then a few weeks later, I started to get a pain in my left shoulder, and then my left arm, and then my other arm, my hands, and all of a sudden, my husband was feeding me and tying my shoes for me in secret. And I was left to occupy a body that felt like a stranger to me. So at its worst, I was kind of in bed for about a year. I might go and, some of you know this dance. If you live with chronic illness, I might get up and get the mail. I'd come right back to bed. I might go to a meeting and save face and lie back down. But I spent my days just kind of lying there, still as ice on my back, just trying not to disturb anything. And I thought, not cognitively, but certainly somewhere in my soul, I thought, if I can't have dignity in my body, I'll at least have it in my mind. And so I buried myself in books and documentaries and all of these things that would enhance my sense of intellectual worth. And in a time when my body needed compassion and tenderness, I did precisely the same thing that the world does to Black bodies, to disabled bodies. I turned against it. I turned against it. And any form of any vision for a dignified body kind of became further and further from me. I even lost hope for a dignified body. Not only did I have a disordered way of viewing the body, I no longer even had imagination for a body that could have value to me. So, about a year into my illness, I'm at the Cleveland Clinic, which if those of you who have, been on this journey, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, this is where they send you when doctors call you a mystery. So I'm at the Cleveland Clinic and being poked and getting all these tests done. And I get released the day before my husband and I were supposed to go to Paris. We didn't think we were going to be able to go. We get released, and when the time comes, choose Paris for however stupid or wise that decision was. Probably more stupid than wise, because as we traveled, I had just had some testing done on my legs, and as we traveled, my kind of state began to deteriorate. By the time we got to Paris, I was needing a wheelchair to get around, which is not all that conducive to the cobblestone streets of the Latin Quarter. So I ended up spending at least 3 days of that trip in bed, just lying. And I would say, I came to Paris to lay in someone else's bed. One of those mornings, I was in a particular state of desperation, despair. My husband had left to go get us kind of coffee, croissants, and I was just lying there feeling terrified, and I began to pray out loud. Now, you don't know me. You might know I wrote a book of prayer, so this won't seem weird to you, but I can tell you I am not someone who really tends to pray out loud, and certainly not organically. If I'm praying, there's a form in front of me that was written by someone else, and I kind of follow it along, but whatever it was about that particular kind of fear led me to that in myself. I began to pray out loud, and because it was out loud and without a script, I, for the first time, was hearing my interior life turned against my physical self. And the kinds of words I was using out loud, I couldn't escape them. The vitriol, the violence of it, and I'll spare you the expletives, but the prayer was closer to, God, if you just save me from these expletive hands, useless expletive legs. And something about hearing it out loud, something in me kind of rose up in defense of me, and I just stopped mid-sentence, and I began to pass the peace around my body. If you're not familiar with that kind of liturgical placement there, it occurs in Episcopal Anglican liturgies, Catholic liturgies, but there's a point in those those rites where you pass the peace, you shake hands with someone, you say peace, peace. In a lot of churches, it's kind of been reduced to this greeting, that point in the service where you say hello. But its placement in the liturgy is actually really intentional and I think beautiful. It occurs right before people kind of approach the altar together and often receive communion or the Eucharist. And it's a way to say, I'm right by you, you're right by me, before you approach and receive the liberation of the sacraments together. Anyways, I began to do this around my body. It's the beginning of some of my eye issues. I remember putting my eyelashes to the back of my hand and saying peace and flexing my hands, my toes, peace, peace, peace. And the beautiful thing about it is it wasn't this cognitive decision. It wasn't this, I didn't think to myself, oh, there's this ancient liturgical practice, passing the peace, and if you do this towards your body, it will be really beautiful. I didn't, and I think most of the meaning of that moment has only occurred to me in memory. But I did it, this bodily, instinctual gesture. And I wasn't healed. And actually, things got a lot worse before they got to the place where I'm standing and talking in front of you today. And still, I've known no greater reconciliation to date. Reconciliation with the flesh, with one's own body. In her book, The Body is Not an Apology, Sonia Renee Taylor writes, "Body terrorism is a hideous tower whose primary support beam is the belief that there is a hierarchy of bodies." She says, we uphold this system by internalizing this hierarchy and using it to situate our own value and worth in the world. She also writes, living in a society structured to profit from our self-hate creates a dynamic in which we are so terrified of being ourselves, we adopt terror-based ways of being in our bodies. So I adopted a terror-based way of occupying my body. And along the way, I realized I'd been neglecting the kind of physical dignity in me long before I became sick. As a Black woman, I escaped my body to avoid a world hell-bent on anti-Blackness. As a queer woman, I escaped my body to avoid the ingrained homophobia that told me I was dirty. And as a child, as a weird, quiet, introverted child, I escaped my body to survive a perceived alienation of it. And similar to that distance from your interior world, that distance from one's body can so easily become hatred of it. Trauma, in all of its forms, trains us toward disembodiment and dissociation, right? And in the immediacy of trauma, I want to say this, in the immediacy of trauma, dissociation, it's actually a mercy. It's a biological mercy. There are some things you weren't meant to exist through in your body, and that's fine. But perpetual disembodiment, once the threat is departed, it's not a mercy, it's a prison. I've been telling myself since the bed in Paris, and anytime I kind of find myself returning to those same habits, I tell myself, if you aren't in your body, someone else is. I say it to myself all the time. Cole, if you aren't in your body, someone else is. It's not a void. It's an open door. You want to talk about chains that Thurman's speaking out? They apply to that same dignity in the body, that same knowledge of the body. If you aren't in your body, someone else is. There are systems that have everything to gain from our disembodiment because emptied bodies are easier to use, okay? In a world where we're forced to march to rallying cries of "I can't breathe." Okay, when we're forced to hear Black people cry out for their maker and their mom with some of their last words being "I can't breathe," what does it actually mean to be in our bodies and to protect our breath? Like, this isn't just self-help wellness fluff. This is profound resistance. For those of us whose collective breath has been stolen, for those of us whose bodies have been degraded, profound resistance, defiance to exist in one's body. So, I practice breath prayer, for example. I share it a lot on social media. When I pause to practice a breath prayer, it has nothing to do with kind of self-help or that now co-opted capitalist appetite for the self-help world, the vacuum that is self-help propaganda. No, this is deeply connected to the people I come from, to my own flesh. It's a reclamation. And so when I speak, anytime I speak about dignity, I have to be desperately clear that I'm not talking about this invisible, immaterial matters of the soul. I'm talking raw, deeply enfleshed dignity of our bodies, the bodies we come from, the bodies around us. So I want to talk about dignity and collective memory. What of our dignity is inherited? Okay, about a year before I began writing my first book, This Here Flesh, I'd been thinking about my ancestors and what of their existence, what of their stories reside in me. And I'd already begun this kind of personal project with my family. I was interviewing different elders in my family and trying to collect what stories I could and document them. And I was noticing a lot of threads in my grandma's story, my father's, my own. And at the same time, I was meant to be writing this book, a book that ended up being very different than the one I was meant to write, because I would go to write about dignity, and I couldn't write about dignity without writing about my dad greasing my scalp every morning. And I couldn't write about lament without writing about my grandma crumpled on the linoleum floor. And by the time I went to kind of do this philosophizing, this contemplation, their stories were so awake in me that I couldn't go anywhere else. I would interview them on a Saturday, I'd write on a Sunday, and every time I'd be done speaking to them, my own face appeared to me, with greater clarity than it ever had before. I understood myself. I was locating myself in ways that I hadn't before through their stories. And it wasn't until after I finished writing This Here Flesh that I read for the first time Toni Morrison's The Source of Self-Regard, and specifically her comments on the interior life of ancestors. So if you have read that essay, The Site of Memory, in it, she's kind of criticizing this time in the literary world for her, where Black people were beginning to show up on page more in books, a lot of Black enslaved people. But she was saying they're showing up completely devoid of an inner life, completely absent of what's happened, any kind of complicated interior dignity, let alone complicated, somatic dignity. She's criticizing this, and she writes, "And I can't tell you how I felt reading to my grandmother while she was turning over and over in her bed because she was dying and she was not comfortable. But I could try to reconstruct the world that she lived in. Like Frederick Douglass talking about his grandmother, and James Baldwin talking about his father, and Simone de Beauvoir talking about her mother. These people are my access to me. They are my entrance into my own interior life, which is why the remains that float around them at the archaeological site surface first, and they surface so vividly and so compellingly that I acknowledge them as my route to a reconstruction of a world, to an exploration of an interior life that was not written, at least to the revelation of any kind of truth." She says, they are my entrance. So this is the thought I want to kind of leave us with, is what if our journey toward apprehending our own dignity is not a solitary journey? We don't have to go to the woods by ourselves for 7 days to hear something true of us. What if it's actually born out of those who come before us, those whose stories rest in us? I think our understanding of dignity is in many ways a mission of time travel. As I wrote this here, as I excavated the stories of my grandmother and father, my own face appeared to me. What do we do with that, with that kind of clarity? And in that, my own dignity. I put down the pen feeling nearer to my true self than I had ever before. And I think we can say and hold space for the reality that just as we inherit the trauma, the grief, the pain of those that come before us, we also inherit the defiance, the beauty, the delight of the kitchen, that we can tap into. So what are the stories that have made you? Those that happened to you, and those, as Thurman would say, that happened long before you were even a thought in the mind of creation. Howard Thurman says, who are you? You've got to find out what your name is. And Alice Walker, years later, will kind of meet this beauty when she says, how simple a thing it seems that to know ourselves as we are, we must know our mother's names. How simple a thing it seems that to know ourselves as we are, we must know our mother's names. So I wrote a book of, intergenerational storytelling because I'm convinced we make sense of who we are, not primarily through theories and personality tests or even through data, but they all have their value. But I think primarily we make sense of our lives through story, through the practice of memory being held rightly and being turned over, again and again and again. I think collective memory is a defiant dignity practice, liberation practice, and we should be rightly suspicious of any healing journey that demands we forget. In a world, I'm going to end so we can have some time for Q&A, but in a world that, dares to degrade us, and after all of this time and no shortage of resources has failed, at its project to do so, failed, what does it mean to have dignity be our origin story, inherent, unmovable, mysterious, granting us the courage to say our own names and with the gravity they require? So I've just given you kind of my own spiritual landscape, really, and it's held together by questions. Here they are. Is it liberating your true self, so your interior world? These are the questions I ask myself. Is it honoring the body? And finally, is it drawing you deeper into story or divorcing you from it? Is it liberating your true self, your interior world? Is it honoring your body? Is it drawing you deeper into story or divorcing you from it? As we close, you can hear this from Zora Neale Hurston, which I've kind of reclaimed and repurposed outside of its context. She says, when God had made the man, he made him out of stuff that sung all the time and glittered all over. Some angels got jealous and chopped him into millions of pieces, and still he glittered and hummed. So they beat him down to nothing but sparks. But each little spark had a shine and a song, so they covered each one over with mud. And the lonesomeness and the sparks make them hunt for one another. So may the dignity in me hunt for the dignity in you, in the interior, and in the body, and in the stories that have made us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we have time for some questions, and there's a mic here for people to kind of line up if they're, it's a very big ask that you would get out and walk to this. I wouldn't do it if I were you. But I am happy to ask questions about anything that I've spoken about or other aspects of my writing or work. Are there any questions in the room?
Hi, hello.
Hello.
My question is about storytelling and gaps. So I was adopted. My story has a period that I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for other people whose family lines or stories may be disrupted in some way. How might we address those kind of gaps in our stories?
Yeah, it's a very good
Thank
question. Thank you. That essay that I quoted from Toni Morrison, The Site of Memory, in it, she actually, I think, has a lot to say for those of us who have. So she acknowledges that, is she actually acquainted with the interior worlds of her great-great-grandmother, for example? No. So she talks about this practice of imagination. She says, with some historical details and a little bit of guesswork, she's trying to assemble something that could have been real and finding meaning in the process of imagination, even if it is not kind of revealed to her with complete clarity. This happened, this. So I'm interested in that idea. It's not to say it's not without pain, those gaps, but the idea that we can kind of approach stories that we come from, that we might not know, or we might be separated from, just with the process of imagination, and that we would maybe still be formed by that process of, I wonder what my mother would have said if X, Y, and Z, that there's still some like good formative potential there. But it is very painful. I think a lot about, because I have some gaps. I think they're quite loud in this here flesh, actually, if people pay attention. I mean, I don't mention my mom at all, and people always ask. Those gaps are kind of by design, but I do have to contend with them in my personal life. And for me, I found some type of comfort, solace, and whatever gaps there are, trying to fill them with people I do know. So I consider James Baldwin a close ancestor. I consider Audre Lorde, and I've taken to books and reading to kind of fill in stories and types of voices that are absent in my own kind of family history, people that are estranged but might show up in other ways and in different texts. Yeah, but it's painful, the gaps. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Are there other questions? I don't know if we can negotiate a different mic situation.
Quick question. How can one use memory and the sort of collection of things and material to build a narrative around or fill a narrative that is good enough for storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, well, I think there are many ways, but I can tell you what it's looked like for me. Well, I guess I do have some general thoughts. I think it needs to occur off of digital spaces. I feel pretty passionate about that. It's not to say that some archival work, of course, and kind of family storytelling can't happen in the digital realm. I just think knowing the ways these systems and technologies are wielded against Black people, I lack trust in them. So I write a lot of things by hand. I'm not trusting in Facebook to hold my photos or my grandmother's memories. I think there's kind of, I would say a different kind of dignity and beauty that can be preserved with a physical artifact. So I've tried my best. My family, we don't have many physical artifacts, and I think it's to our detriment and sorrow. But I'm trying my best to create those artifacts so other generation has them. So anyways, I think we can think about artifacts, we can think about journals, photos, things like that. But also, in terms of story formation, I realize like my voice alone is never really going to be a trustworthy narrator. I need other voices and other kind of family views to complicate things. My experience with my father is very different than my youngest brother's experience of my father. And to save something true of them, I have to account for my own limitations as a storyteller. So I think the more voices you can bring in, I interviewed even the 5-year-olds and the 6-year-olds, I interviewed them about my grandmother. What do you think? What do you think about grandma? Or like, what does she smell like to you? And I think their memories, and they make it richer. They're creating this richer portrait of who she was for future generations. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Thank you a ton for your work. Don't do it. We'll do it later. Thank you a ton.
You know, I was looking at you that whole time. I know her.
I know her.
And did you see me looking like, why? And why did I? Well, it's because I was drawn to you before I realized who you were. But thank you for coming.
Thank you for being.
Yes.
I was going to say thank you so much for your work. And I was going to say that I know for women who look and sound like us, your work has been critical in our being process. But for all the being we are doing, there is so much undoing. How do you hold that tension?
If I would have known you were here, I would have called you up. You speak, Rashida. I have undoing with a lot of self-compassion, I think, because when I first started kind of sharing publicly, when I first started kind of reclaiming who I am and telling the truth about who I am, a lot of that reclamation work was still a project of self-hatred. For example, rest, I'd be like, yes, I'm resting. We're remembering our bodies, right? But then if I can't sleep at 1 a.m, it wasn't a voice of self-compassion that met me. It was, what are you doing? You're supposed to rest. It was this punishment, this, a tyrant, a policing that I had adopted in my interior life that I had to undo and realize if I'm going to get free, I need to also interrogate the ways that I think I'm going to get free. I can't just think about, what I want to be. I want to be a person that sleeps 8 hours, sure, but how I get there is not through the same mechanisms that were intended to destroy me. It's not through policing and threatening and this kind of despair, if this scarcity of if you don't get 10. So anyways, I think a lot more people can resonate with this, especially if my generation, this inner critic, this inner self-hatred under the guise of self-improvement and liberation and reclamation that occurs in spaces. I think it's helpful when it's done in community, the communities that you are forming. that we can call that out in one another easier than I can call it out in myself. To have a community they're with you on the liberation journey, but they're not interested in those same kind of mechanisms of self-hatred that you're trying to use to get there. I think they can see them and hear them in different ways, hear the way we talk about progress in different ways. So I've had some good friends that have kind of pulled me in, like, okay, you're trying for better, you're trying for more, but at what cost, Yeah, it's a good question. Undoing.
Hello, my question is honestly kind of very similar to that. Is as I hear you talking about honoring our own inner dignity, I've also heard you talk about how it might have relational impacts. And I'm wondering, can you talk about the process of how to navigate those relational impacts as you are honoring your own inner dignity?
Yeah. It's hard. You all know that. This, I think. That's why you asked the question, is like, it is hard when you're trying to really tell the truth about who you are and take your own voice seriously. You're met with all kinds of pushback from people who might even love you and care about you, but they had an idea of who they are. They had an idea of how your dignity was meant to manifest in the world. And it creates this narrowing vision for who you are as opposed to open-handed, expansive. So I mean, for me, I had to just leave spaces that were in service to my false self. Sure, I could probably re-enter them now, years later, and kind of hold on to my own voice, the cadence of my own speech and things like that. But I just had to leave. I didn't go to kind of these, people use language of like deconstruction and things. I didn't go to kind of deconstruction spaces even. I just fled. I left all kind of Christian white intellectual spaces, and I took refuge in artists and poets and painters and people who my belonging wasn't going to be dependent on what I thought about heaven, hell, what I thought about God, how much belief I could muster on any given day. And that is when I was truly able to kind of locate myself, when that belonging was no longer at stake. I will say on a positive note, I think there is a beautiful potential for deeper connection then. So in the Thurman address, probably the most beautiful part in it that I didn't quote, but I think it's more beautiful than what I did quote. There's this part where he says, "Now, if I hear the sound of the genuine in me, and you hear the sound of the genuine in you, it's possible for me to go down in me and come up in you. And then having made that pilgrimage, only having made that pilgrimage, we can see each other face to face." And I just find that image so beautiful, as if to say, if two people are in alignment on their own journeys of locating that interior dignity, that actually there's real potential, and that journey doesn't necessarily lead to you only coming up in yourself, but coming up in your neighbor who's also on that journey and meeting each other and meeting your own face. That image to me has become really important, and it helps me kind of make friends now. It helps me kind of discern, like, who are people I trust to kind of be on this journey with me. It has to be people who are deeply protective over something true in themselves. They don't need to know everything. It doesn't need to be static, but that sense of I'm protective. I'm protective over something in myself that feels honest and good. So yeah, there's potential there, potential for separation, but also potential for intimacy and beauty and friendship. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Hello. Okay. I'm glad I came to this panel, I want to say. And like being here, like I've really reflected a lot. Like I'm 18 and I'm just new to the school and stuff. And I relate to you like really more than I should. Like, like I've been diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. I've also like younger me have like mixed like potions and like fragrance. Yeah.
I didn't think you were going there.
Right. Like, Fabuloso, the mop water, yeah. I mixed it with perfume to create like a new like smelling detergent for mopping floors.
Brilliant.
And it's funny because you used to read in closets. I read under my dining table. So yeah. And like coming here, I really wanted to ask, like, how did you discern the voice of your true self? Like in a world that rewarded food and like over your authentic self, like how did you listen to your voice? And also like relating to it spiritually, because I'm from Jamaica. I've grown up spiritually my whole life. And like my mom, it's a generational illness, and we would say it's a curse really. But we would say like, how did the experience of living in your changed body like make you still see yourself worthy of like care from God and self?
Okay, yes. Can you just repeat the first part of your first question and I'll remember?
I'm sorry.
No, it's not okay. It's you're nothing to be sorry about.
Oh no, you're good. Okay. How do you discern the voice of your true self?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard work, but I think it was less a matter of like discerning in a way and more a matter of choosing. I think many of us already know we already know who we are, and there's this conflict and this restraint in how it, how much we give it permission to kind of come out and be in the world. I think there are parts of me where I'm like, wait, is that really me? Is that is that trauma? Is that and I found it's not really that helpful, or it's not really in service to anything for me to parse that out with too much pressure. I just think am I listening? And once I do know something is true of me, am I able to kind of live into that and exist into that? I think listening does a lot of work, just listening and remembering. But I'm at least of the belief, I think other people can disagree, that many of us already know. I think there's this deep interior knowing. And we're talking very kind of imprecise and vague language, but I think there are things about ourselves we know to be true. We just resist the presentation of them. So, yeah, it was a project of choosing, are you going to let this out? Are you going to, and then as for kind of the body and how I kind of came to think I was worthy of care in a different body. And, well, I guess this kind of goes with your first question as well. I think being sick, and I'm not prescribing this and I don't want to romanticize it, but I think for me, being sick took me to places in myself that I probably could have avoided going for many, many years, had I not been forced to just lie still, had I not been so terrified of what was going to happen. It takes you, I'm sure it's taken you to places of not just what you fear, but what you might lose, what you want to do. And so that's just a personal note, not really telling you all to go out and get sick, but I think it helped take me to places in my inner life and reclaim them. And slowly that led into my body, that reclamation of like, oh, if I think 6-year-old Cole like meant something, that there was value to her mixing potions in the yard and like sitting in reading in laundry baskets and closets and tucking away, then I maybe think that there's some value in 34-year-old Cole who needs to lock herself in her room, one day a week and like stay under the covers and read now and rest. So that recovery of kind of my child self, I think people help a great deal. I mentioned community. I have friends who just like they won't tolerate my self-hatred talk. They just won't tolerate my disembodiment. They're not impressed that I'm on a stage speaking or that I wrote a book that people like they love me, but they don't care about. After this, they're going to text me, what are you eating? Did you eat today? What time do you get in? When does your flight land? What are you going to, and there's this protective energy they have over my body that has kind of called me into my body myself. So I think it's a lot for any one person and just start believing that their body is worthy of care and goodness, to try to muster that on your own and kind of resist centuries of anti-Blackness, centuries of ableism and all of this all on your own just by the power of self-love. I think it's not realistic. I think you need other people that are getting you there and resisting that with you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. You're probably like, why are you making me stand here? Thank you for that question and knowing that we're kindred spirits. I know that cost you a lot to stand up there and ask that, so thank you. And I think there was one more. If you want to come, I'll try to be succinct so that we can sign books.
I work in college campus ministry and I use your prayers a lot with my students. So thank you for giving me material to use when I'm on the run and I can just grab Black Liturgies. I've been so impressed by your ability to create new and creative prayers around so many things. And I'm just curious into like your process or any advice you have to share or empower us to also kind of write down our prayers to God.
That's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer for you, but I am not a writer who has kind of any strict process. I mean, for the social media posts that I do on Black Liturgies, I can say I don't spend a lot of time doing it, and I think it helps. I think it's one of the reasons maybe it appeals to people is that it's a little unpolished, there's often spelling errors and misplaced commas, and it's not highly edited, but I'll kind of wake, feeling whatever I'm feeling or having had the conversations I had the previous day, and I'll just write those pretty quickly. The book prayers have taken more time, but it's kind of I'll tell you, a general process would be to try my best to decenter myself just a bit and kind of do this dance in and out of experiences that might not be that close to me. It's actually really arrogant, I think, to think that you could rightly articulate someone else's inner life in prayer. I hope it's a kind of sacred arrogance that can be used for good, but it does require a kind of audacity, a kind of like, I think I have the ability to speak not just to my own inner world, but maybe someone else's, and create this thing that people can kind of enter and exit. But yeah, so it's a process of decentering myself. Sometimes I'm there loud in a prayer, but often, people will reach out to me after and like, are you okay? And, I read this thing and I'm like, well, I didn't write that out of my own experience. I wrote that because someone I deeply loved, I was thinking and trying to maybe make that journey into their inner life and their experience. So I'd say there's a lot of imagination, that practice of imagination that Morrison talks about, I think is required in liturgy writing and prayer writing. Yeah. Thank you all for listening and being in this space. And yeah, I'm happy to sign books for however long you want to wait in line to have them signed. So thank you again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Cruz. I'm the executive director of the Marty Center, and I get the job of the boring parts of the night. And that is to say, if you are going to have your book signed, could you please stay in your seat? And if you are not having your book signed, there is a reception downstairs. If you're getting your book signed, you can go to the reception also. But there is a reception downstairs on the first floor. And if you would like to join us for something to eat and drink, please feel free to do that. And if you are getting your book signed, please wait while everyone else exits, and then we will have you line up here where you have a little more space. And Cole has agreed to sign until the books are done. So if you are not staying for the book signing, please get ready to go. And also, please join me once more in saying thank you to Cole Arthur Riley.